Okay, totally screwed up that last video. Alright, so let's try this again. So what I was going to do was do a video on how to set up, oh, already had that, let's just kill that. To set up a Debian minimal install with 12.8 Bookworm to get a newer kernel and a newer firmware for that system. So I'm just going to use Virt Manager. Again, you can use like GNOME boxes. I use that a lot too. And then there's VMware, which I've never really used, and was that VirtualBox? I haven't used that either, but Virt Manager works quite well. And just gonna give it like 4 gig and just a few cores. Yeah, we're just going to do 50 there. And that will run its own here. So let me move this to my other workstation. And the main reason I wanted to do this, to be able to get a newer kernel and a newer firmware, was because I had upgraded my system a few months ago, and the stable Debian Bookworm didn't work quite well with my video card and some of my hardware. It was just too new compared to when Bookworm had came out. So I do an expert install here because I need to set up a few things. Again, do your language however you need to. I don't need any extra. I don't need the blind person thing. Keyboard, American English, and we'll load up. I don't need any of that extra stuff either. So this again is pretty simple, quick, minimal install with the network hardware. All that looks good, and being that I really like using Debian, and I like using stable Debian, but with my newer hardware, and I knew this was going to happen when I built my new system, I was going to have some issues. Name this just DebVirt for fun. You don't have to put a LAN name in, but I always do. I usually do set up as root, but just for this I'm not, so that I can have my main user, the super user, without having to jump through the hoops of setting up the sudo user and all that. So just makes it a little quicker. I'll just do a simple password. I'm not going to keep this VM. I use NTP. That just sets it up to where you get your network time. I'm in the central time zone. I'll detect my disk. This is using the BIOS partitioning instead of UEFI. That's just from the virtual machine. On your system, you're probably going to use UEFI, so you'll need to set it up differently. Generally speaking, I set up everything manually because I have other drives and everything, so I like to set up my partitions manually. But I'm not going to worry about that on a virtual machine. Just for the sake of time, just do everything kind of default here. And it works fine if you do it that way, especially if you only have one disk and you're just installing Debian. If you have multiple disks, you'll want to go to play around with that. This is just confirming that you're going to destroy everything, so we'll do that. We'll install this base system. This doesn't take too awful long. This is the net install, so it is pulling everything from the server. So if you have a slow connection, it can take a bit of a time. But since there's not a lot of packages coming in, since it's so minimal, it usually doesn't take very long. My internet's, moderately fast, so it usually doesn't take too long to get this set up, unless I happen to run into a small or a issue with the mirror network. But this usually goes by pretty quick. And some of this, it may pull off the actual ISO. I don't know for sure. but I think it pulls everything off the internet to get, because there's usually no updates whenever I go back through, so I'm pretty sure it's pulling everything fresh. And then here was part of the problem where it's using the 6.1 kernel, and I was having issues with refresh rates and a few other issues, some lockups, things like that on my newer system. It just wasn't going to work real great with that kernel, especially with the firmware that comes with that kernel. It will boot though, and this virtual machine, it all works fine no matter what, but I want to show you how to do it if you're doing this on hardware that is much newer. Alright, we are going to set that up. Scan extra media, no. Use network mirror, yes, yes. Going to do Debian. We're going to use the non-free firmware, even though we will be updating that. I will use non-free software. I'm not worried about the source repositories because we're not going to be pulling any source. Here's the important part. You're going to want to make sure you enable backports, because that's where we're going to get all our information, our new packages from. Which I do believe they even have a new Mesa now, which I haven't played with that yet. Most of my gaming and everything I do through flat packs and such, so I don't really need a newer Mesa. But if you do, I think that is possible in backports now. But you'll have to look up on how to get that all enabled, because I haven't really messed with that much. So install just the base stuff. That'll get all that going. Let's see, make sure we're recording correctly. Alright. Not worried about automatic updates. Not worried about package survey. Here's where I don't want anything other than just standard system utilities. Usually I'll do SSH, but I don't need that on the virtual machine. SSH comes in handy if you need to log into it from a separate machine, but I won't be doing that on this system, so just to save a little time, a little less packages to install. Alright, now we're going to do grub. Again, it's going to be doing the classic BIOS grub since we're not doing UEFI on this system. Otherwise, you'll have to do it a little differently. Because I have to select the drive with UEFI. It'll just kind of do that. But that's simple enough. Now, what I do here, before I actually finish the install, I execute a shell because there's extra packages I want to pull in. Especially if you're using like a laptop or something on wireless, this just makes it a lot easier. So you'll chroot into target. That gets you into the install target. And then I will apt install get so I can pull in .files or anything else I need. Fish because I like that shell a lot. And then I'll pull in network manager. That just makes setting up network a lot easier, especially if you're running on a laptop or something like that. So you want to get those things done before you reboot, and it's just easier just to chroot into that, especially if you're doing a minimal install. You won't have to do that if you pick something like GNOME or KDE or something. All that'll be installed for you. But if you're doing a bare minimal, it's a lot easier to go ahead and get that installed before you reboot. And then you just exit once, exit twice, and then the install's finished. And you'll go ahead and click finish. That will get this up installing, a few more packages going. It'll ask you if you want to do UTC time instead of local time. Again, if you're dual booting Windows, you'll want to do local time, so you'd want to say no here, but since I'm not dual booting Windows or anything like that, UTC works great, so we'll just say yes. Now it's ready to reboot. At this point, if you're doing it on a hard machine, you'll pull out your thumb drive and the system will reboot. And that will bring you just to this bare minimal install here, and you don't really have anything up and running at this point that will mean much. But what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and log in here. I like to go ahead and just change my shell to fish, just because I'm used to it, so we're going to go ahead and do that anyway. Alright, that brings us here. Now, what we want to do is, so that this will work better with the hardware I have, I'm going to pull in the newer firmwares from backports. So you'll do apt t bookworm backports, as long as you enabled the backports. If not, you'll have to go in manually and enable them. And then you'll do install, and you'll do Linux, or let's do firmware, Linux, and since I have some Realtek stuff, I'll do firmware Realtek, and that will pull in those new firmwares. Obviously, you gotta do sudo, and that will pull in all those new firmwares, which was from like I believe July of 2024, which is much newer than what is in the standard Bookworm repository. So these are much newer firmwares, which is new enough for my hardware, and that will cause me much less headache trying to get things set up correctly. Now what I like to do after this gets up and running is go ahead and do the same thing for the kernel, and you'll just do Linux image AMD 64, and I usually go ahead and do the headers as well, Linux headers AMD 64, and that will pull in the latest kernel from backports, which is usually pretty new. That we're at 6.11.10 right now, and that's a pretty new kernel. Definitely new enough for the hardware that I've got, and that will get updated as it progresses. It doesn't update insanely fast, but you'll get a much newer kernel that way. There's other ways to get kernels like Liquorix or Zanmod, which can get you an even newer or more tweaked kernel, but I've had hit or misses with those. It usually works a lot better just to use the backport kernel. And that should be set up, so what I'll go ahead and do is reboot that, and that will get us rebooted back into that new kernel. And there we go. So let's check and see. It has booted into 6.11, so we're in a brand new one. So let's see what we got here. Wrong password. Go ahead and throw NeoFetch on here, and you'll see what it is showing. That we are actually in Bookworm, stable Bookworm, with a newer kernel and some newer firmware to get all our good stuff going. So we are in standard Bookworm, but we're on the newer kernel, and everything should be running pretty smooth. And then from here you can install pretty much whatever you want, and your hardware should work great. Flat packs work great. I've had no issues running GNOME, KDE, window managers and stuff like that this way. So you have a blank slate to go whatever direction you want to. And I appreciate you watching. I hope you like, share, and subscribe, and I'll hopefully do some more tutorials on both Debian or maybe some Arch and some stuff like that. Just simple stuff, get you up and running on things that you may need or issues you may run into. Thanks for watching.